चलो सर से भी कोई मिलेगा Recorded and will be telecasted live on YouTube. We are really looking forward to this very important lecture by you, sir. And without taking much time, I would request you to please deliver your lecture. Over to you, sir.
I can see. Thank you very much. Thank you to Manasi, to the organizers of this conference, and to all of you for being very patient. You have been hearing about European Union now for several days. So I don't know how much you are bored and how much you are interested, but I look forward to this conversation with you on conceptualizing the EU and the role and its role in the global order. You have had a lot. You would have had a lot of presentations and lectures so far on various aspects of European Union. I am not. I'm not an expert on European Union. I'm a student of international relations more broadly. So the way I want to frame this conversation, this discussion is how do we think about European Union as a concept? Why is it important if you are a student of political science, if you are a student of international relations, if you're just an observer of international relations, why should European Union matter to you? I think that's an essential question before anything else that you can discuss, whether European Union's global engagement or foreign policy, security policy, trade policy, climate policy, etc. The first question that we all should be cognizant of, aware of, is what role European Union plays in the way we look at the world, in the way we think of the world, in the way we think of international politics, in the way we think of what is happening around us, in the way we conceptualize global order, in the way we perceive the fundamental underpinnings of an emerging international global architecture. And that's why European Union is such a unique concept in so many ways, that I think having an understanding of European Union, having an understanding of some of the challenges that flow from European Union, having some of the achievements of European Union to understand, that is something we need to be cognizant of. And that's what I'm here to talk about. And I hope you find it of interest. Sure. So for me as a student of international relations, why does European Union matter? Now, to answer that question, I think we have to go back to some of the first principles of political science and international relations. I don't know how many of you are students of international relations or how many of you have studied international relations as a discipline. But if you are thinking of international politics, whatever happens in the realm of international politics, what is the fundamental difference between domestic politics and international politics? The fundamental difference between the two realms of politics, both are politics, but defined in different ways. If you are thinking of the realm of domestic politics, and if you are thinking of the realm of international politics, the fundamental difference that we think of is this notion of anarchy. That if you are part of a domestic, if you are thinking of domestic political system, you have institutions to manage chaos. So you have a legislature that passes laws, you have an executive that implements laws, and you have a judiciary that tries to ensure that laws are implemented in a fair and equitable manner. But if you juxtapose politics to the international realm, where nation states are primary actors, what happens? There is a fundamental disjuncture there with domestic politics. And the disjuncture is about anarchy, not defined as chaos, but anarchy defined as a lack of an overarching institution. So there is no institution over 190 odd states in the international system that can tell a nation what to do. So Russia can launch a war in Ukraine, China can launch a war with Taiwan, and China can come and sit on India's borders, there is little that anyone, any law can prevent it from doing. So in a way, that anarchical environment, that anarchy situation is the fundamental, characteristic of international politics. And that is how, when we are thinking of domestic politics and international politics, we have to be cognizant that when we are all living here in this country, we are all protected and preserved by the laws of the nation. We know that you guys will be admonished if you behave badly by Manasi and by your other professors who would tell you to behave properly. There are laws. If you misbehave, then you will be shunted out of the university. Then if you misbehave out in the society, there will be laws that protect you from others who may impinge on your interests. But in the international realm, Ukraine can't do anything about Russian transgressions. Ukraine can't appeal to any other country and say, well, this is the international law. We all know that you can't cross a border of another nation. But if you do cross a border, if there is a powerful country like Russia at this time, America did this in the context of Iraq, China is doing this in the context of several countries, there is little that can be done to prevent that from happening unless the power of other nations comes into play. So anarchy is a very important criteria of thinking about the difference between domestic and global politics. Global politics is defined by the realm of anarchy, and therefore this anarchical environment is the fundamental distinction between domestic politics and international politics, and therefore what it means for nation states. Because there is no overarching authority that can prevent nations from doing certain things, how do you protect yourself? How does a nation protect itself? By trying to become more powerful. So you try to acquire more power. Why is it that nations want to be economically powerful, militarily powerful, diplomatically powerful? Because that allows those nations to have a certain degree of autonomy in international politics. So if you're looking at China today, China is very powerful, it is becoming more powerful, and it is becoming more powerful, it can now pursue its interests. Similarly, if you look at the US, it is very powerful, it is one of the most powerful countries in the world. It can protect its interests in a way, unlike, say, a small African country that can't do much about. So therefore, in order to become more secure, in order to ensure that your interests are not impinged upon by other nations, you want to become more powerful, because that's the only way to ensure that you have maximum security and maximum autonomy to make your decisions. And therefore, power is a very important element, concept in international relations. Of course, it's a very important concept in politics. The fundamental, one of the most cited definitions of politics is who gets what, when, and how. That applies everywhere. But in the context of international politics, power becomes a very important medium by which you define the logic of international relations. And therefore, we often say that great power politics is what drives global politics. What happens between major powers is what drives international relations. So what happens between China and the US is a very important determinant of international relations. We are increasingly talking about a new Cold War between China and the US. Similarly, during the old Cold War days, you had the Soviet Union and America fighting or trying to come to terms with each other via Cold War. So there was a post-Second World War, there was 4 decades of Cold War, which ended in 1990. And the person who actually ended the Cold War was Mikhail Gorbachev, who died just yesterday. So you have in a sense, this idea that great power, great power politics is what drives international relations is fundamental to the way we think of international relations, and it's a primary driver of international relations. So power maximization becomes a very dominant theme. Now, why I am harping on some of these ideas is because I want to come to why European Union is so special, why it is so exceptional. So if you have this anarchical environment, if countries want to acquire more power, if countries want to become more secure by acquiring more power, then it's a dog eats dog world out there. Hobbes famously said the world is nasty, brutish, and short. In a sense, you are looking at the world and you are trying to make some sense of that world. Now, but if you look around the world, you also see a lot of cooperation happening. That countries are not simply always fighting with each other. They're also working with each other to achieve certain aims. And that idea that along with competition, along with rivalry, there is also a lot of positive that happens, even among nation states that are striving for power maximization. So the question, therefore, is how do you explain that phenomena? How do you mitigate some of the effects of anarchy? And one of the ways in which you do this is by creating international institutions. So again, if you go back to 1945 when the Second World War ended, what was the idea? That in order to ensure that there are no more world wars, let's create international institutions that can prevent countries from going after each other. Rather, those countries can converge on certain issue areas, can work together, pool their resources together, and work for common welfare. So you had an entire plethora of international organizations that came into being. United Nations, of course, became the entire United Nations system. Bretton Woods system, IMF and World Bank were created post Second World War. So institutional dynamic is one way in which you control the competitive dynamic of state behavior. So you created institutions. Institutions become a means by which you try to mitigate anarchy. Just as in domestic politics, you have institutions, you have legislature, you have an executive, you have a judiciary. You try to replicate that in the international environment and hope that international politics would start looking more like domestic politics, where laws will be, states will be expected to behave according to certain norms and rules and laws. So today we even have an international court of justice, where on certain issues you can go and try to mediate conflicts. But again, what's the important distinction? That almost all these institutions are predicated on state compliance, state accent. So if India doesn't want to be part of any of these institutions, then it is free to do so. If International Court of Justice tomorrow passes a judgment on a matter pertaining to India and some other country, and India decides not to abide by the law, India is free to do so. No one can compel India. There are no soldiers that will come to India and tell Indian government that this needs to be done. So international law, international institutions are predicated on state consent. It is up to the state, it is up to the country. If you want to follow those norms, if you want to run the world through those norms, then you can apply those norms and apply those rules. But if you don't want to, you're free to do so. So in a few years back, Philippines went to the International Court of Justice, part of the arbitration tribunal, and said that China is encroaching on my territory, South China Sea. And the arbitration tribunal of the International Court of Justice gave a verdict against China. They said China should get out of that encroachment. Nothing happened. China refused to abide by it. China said, we don't believe, we don't agree to the judgment that the ICJ has given. And there is nothing that the world could do to enforce that judgment. So the enforcement mechanism is not present. You can't enforce any country to change its behavior. So you have this problem in international politics that you have to understand as students of the world, that there is no mechanism. It's not like domestic politics. And therefore, when you look at European Union becomes important. Because European Union is an experiment that has never happened before and that is unlikely to happen in the future if the present trends are anything to go by. And that's an experiment where almost all the other international institutions are intergovernmental institutions. That they are contingent on the consent of the government to abide by those norms and standards of those institutions. Where the governments participate in those institutions without giving up any part of their sovereignty. European Union is the only institution in the world where countries have voluntarily given up parts of their sovereignty. And that is what makes European Union such a unique player, such a unique actor in international relations. You will not see any other organization, regional or global, of this kind. And there is a word for that. It's called supranational organization. Whereas the other organizations, all the other organizations are intergovernmental organizations. European Union is the only organization that's in the world that is supranational in character, where countries have given up part of their sovereignty to a higher authority, which is the European Commission, which sits in Brussels. Not all of their sovereignty, not all of their decision-making power, but parts of their sovereignty. So on critical issues, on certain issues, those nations actually do, whether you are sitting in Paris, whether you are sitting in Berlin, whether you are sitting in any of the other European Union countries, the decision-making authority is not with you. The decision-making authority is with Brussels, which is the headquarters of the European Union, where you have a group of bureaucrats who sit. There is also European Parliament, there is also a European Court of Justice, where you have the entire paraphernalia of institutions. And I'm sure this has been discussed with you in terms of the institutional architecture of European Union. But what makes this so unique, so important, so interesting is the fact that nowhere in the world you will find an institution like European Union. And therefore, European Union matters. Its success matters, its failure matters. If it succeeds, it is a new form of world politics. If it fails, then you can argue that such experiments don't work. We have to continue to look at the world through the traditional prism of power politics. And that is why European Union as an experiment is so important, and that is why every time there is a challenge to European Union, fundamental questions arise about the future of global politics, because European Union makes you optimistic about the future of global politics. That here are countries that fought two bloody wars, First World War and Second World War. And after that decided that they want to converge, they want to work together, they want to come together for the welfare of their citizens. It's an ambitious, idealistic project, where nation states voluntarily are ceding parts of their sovereignty. So if it works, then you can think that, there is a possibility for other parts of the world as well. And if it fails, then you go back to the older paradigm and say, well, ultimately power politics trumps everything else. And that is why you have so much debate, so much concern, so much optimism and pessimism surrounding the future of European Union. And that is why European Union matters. So if you look at the evolution of European Union, right? 1948 Treaty of Brussels, 1950 Schuman Plan, then this whole sense was that European countries have fought very difficult wars where they had lost a lot in terms of their manpower, where they had lost a lot in terms of their economic power. So by the time you come to 1950s, the idea is let's start working. Where can we work? Now remember, France and Germany were on the opposite sides during the Second World War. So it starts as this idea of European Coal and Steel Community in 1952, which is very specific, which is very narrow, which is about how do you manage certain resources. So it's not a very, when you start, you are not looking at a world-changing paradigm. You are looking at how do you manage a very small part of your resource engagement. What can, how do you manage coal and steel in Western Europe? That's the whole agenda. But from there, you move to this idea that we can work together as as an economic unit. So you come to European Economic Community, EEC, and then gradually you move to borderless travel, Schengen visa by 1985, and then you move to 1992 Maastricht Treaty, which is actually the defining treaty for European Union, which establishes European Union, but also establishes common foreign and security policy. Again, very interesting, because till 1992, till the Maastricht Treaty, the idea was, well, they can cooperate on economic matters, but not on defense matters, foreign policy. Foreign policy is, again, very risky. Countries don't want to give up their sovereignty. You want to fight with anyone. Why would you wait and see what others are telling you? So, but by 1992, by the Maastricht Treaty, you are saying that, look, they are even willing to come together on foreign and defense policy. Very significant development. And then, of course, you have the Eurozone in 2002, where the currency, which is a very, very vital sign of a nation state. Imagine India without a rupee. That you have given up a sign of your sovereign, you have given up a very important emblem of your sovereignty. You are recognized by your currency. So you give up that right, and you say, well, we will now work through an arrangement where one common currency will work across certain countries. Now, these are big developments in terms of how you redefine your identity as a nation state, from one that looks at the world through the prism of territory and people, to one where you're looking at a certain idea about Europe. That we may all be distinct, we may be French, German, Swedish, Nordic, etc. But ultimately, we are all Europeans, and that regional identity is what is driving your it's creating a normative consensus around certain issues. So that is the reason why I think this notion of European Union as a concept is important. That you can all talk about European Union's foreign policy, security policy, trade policy, green policy, energy policy, etc. But ultimately, what are we talking about, and why should it matter to someone sitting here in Delhi? It matters not because they have a particular trade policy or an energy policy. It matters because it's a different way of looking at the world. Some things we may not agree with. We may not concur with them that, look, this is the best way to shape the world, but it's an idea that you have to engage with. And as students of international relations, it's more important to engage with ideas than with material reality, because ideas in the end, ultimate analysis drive the world. So if you're looking at the idea of European Union, whether it's Zenith or whether it's whether now when there are multiple challenges that have come to the fore, this is what is very interesting. That European Union is trying to create European Union as a normative power. And this is again very important, that the idea was that European Union should transcend power politics. Everyone does power politics. Big powers do power politics. America does power politics. Russia and China will do power politics. But European Union is different. We don't do, and European Union actually said in 1990s, it was a big debate. When European Union said, we don't do geopolitics. We are not interested in geopolitics. We are interested in how can we bring a normative consensus on certain issues, like democracy, like human rights, like peaceful resolution of conflicts. So deliberately giving up sovereignty, deliberately ensuring that while in the case of International Court of Justice, it is my right to abide by the judgment or not. But when you go to European Court of Justice, you have to abide by what European Court of Justice is telling you. There are no ifs and buts there. So trying to make European space, European geography as one, which is distinct from the larger geopolitical narratives around, that has been an important contribution of the European Union. And during the 1990s, that was what was being propounded also. So the sense, and remember what was 1990s? 1990s was the term when Francis Fukuyama declared end of history. I don't know how many of you have read it, but the idea was that if history is a contest of ideas, then the West won that contest of ideas with the demise of some former Soviet Union. free market capitalism, liberal democracy, these were the things that will drive the world. Every country is going to become a liberal democracy and free market capitalistic country. And because every country is going to become similar, there will be no contest among the countries. So that Fukuyama argument was a vindication of what European Union was saying. After all, what were European countries? They were liberal democracies. They are liberal democracies, and they believe in free market capitalism. And they have been, by 1990s, they have been able to give the world an alternative. So it was a high point of liberal optimism or delusion, whatever you might want to call it. So in 1990s, European Union came out and said, we don't do geopolitics. We're not interested in power politics. We are going to transcend power politics. And that was an important moment because many in the world believed that that would happen. It was also a moment of American unipolarity. America was the most important, powerful country after the demise of the Soviet Union. And so you had an entire range of issues on the table where European Union and the project of European Union seemed like a vindication of those normative ideas. And so in the 1990s and 2000s, you see a massive expansion of European Union. All the countries in Eastern Europe want to come to European Union, want to become part of European Union. And all those countries, most of those countries who were part of the Soviet sphere of influence. And so, if you look at the trajectory of the expansion of European Union, if you look at the expansion of the idea of European Union as a sociological, as a political, as a geopolitical experiment, it was booming in 1990s and 2000s. But of course, by the time you come to the last decade, things start changing. Things started looking different. And the challenges that European Union is today facing are of a different magnitude. The project is still there, but the project is being challenged from below, from sideways, from above, because of various reasons. Now, and this is where I want to end with looking at European Union and some of the challenges and what it means for the idea of European Union. The first important challenge is the economic divergence. And if you look at European Union and its partners today, its constituents today, European Union has multiple tracks. Some countries are doing well economically, some countries are not doing well economically. So in 2008-2009 financial crisis, when it came, it hit European Union hard because the richer countries had to subsidize those countries that were not doing well economically, like Portugal, like Spain, like Italy, southern European countries. And those countries did not like this idea that they were being told that they are being managed by the richer countries. So you had this divergence where countries are moving in different directions. And when countries are moving in different directions, economically, their politics also starts to change. So we have seen the rise of the right, far right in many countries, because there is economic discontent in many of these countries. That's one. The other is related to the rise of the right is also migration. See, it's all very well to talk about European unity when everyone looks the same, more or less the same, right? When the population texture starts to change, when people start recognizing that migration has happened and continues to happen, it's changing the demographic profile of many of these countries. You saw a lot of migration from the Middle East and from Africa to certain countries. Then the challenge starts: how do you construct that identity based on differences? So post 9/11, September 11, 2001, when the issue of terrorism became very vital, we also saw Islamist organizations becoming very popular and being targeted by European governments, because that became a point of contestation, that became a point of rallying around identity. So this migration issue continues to dog European Union today. and became one of the reasons why United Kingdom decided to walk out of European Union. So why did UK get out of European Union? Because the argument became that you cannot control who is coming to your country. And so you are now coming back to that essential question of sovereignty. The fundamental challenge for European Union today is that while the nations would have succeeded in transcending sovereignty in 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 2010s, 2020s are becoming more difficult. Today, the issue of sovereignty is being raised time and time again. Of course, because of this issue, Britain walked out of European Union, but there are several other countries who are challenging the right of European Union bureaucracy in Brussels to dictate policy. So you have a disjuncture now on the issue of sovereignty. Countries are demanding, people are demanding that their future, their policy should be decided by people whom they elect, not by people who sit in Brussels and are merely technocrats. So there is this idea of democratic deficit in European Union. That individually, these are some of the most liberal democracies in the world. But if you look at European Union as a construct, it is anti-democratic. That's the argument. So you're looking at a very interesting take on democracy and what it means to be European Union in 21st century. And finally, the issue of balance of power. Then America is changing, China is rising, and in between there is European Union. How do you navigate this very important balance of power shift? Every nation, including India, is going through this, is facing a challenge because of what is happening in the global balance of power. But European Union has a particular problem because European Union, ideationally, ideologically, is a partner of the West, of the US. But it is also a very close partner of, economically, of China. It is the largest trading partner. But today there are concerns about the rise of China even in European Union. European Union is pushing back. European Union is now coming to what is called the Indo-Pacific. So very interestingly, the European Union, which said we don't want to do geopolitics, today European Union is saying we want to do geopolitics. We want to be a geopolitical power. So we have come full circle in terms of our understanding of European Union as a political, as a geopolitical actor, as a foreign policy actor. And finally, in terms of what it can and cannot do, we have seen a lot of investment now being made in terms of what are the challenges that China is posing in terms of intellectual property, in terms of managing security, in terms of Indo-Pacific, but also European Union and India as partners. For a long time, the only prism through which India looked to the European Union was through the prism of economics. And that it's a collection of countries, very difficult to deal with individually, as a group, because you have so many challenges. But economically, it's fine. It's a group. They make their decisions and they move on. But for India, the problem was that because European Union did not do geopolitics, how do you engage with European Union? Because India's concerns were geopolitical. India's concerns were about China, were about Pakistan, were about terrorism, were about Indian Ocean, and European Union had no role there. So the relationship was confined to trade arrangements, trade arguments, trade discussions. Now, as European Union is transcending that problem, or is trying to become a more geopolitical actor, there is a sense that India can engage more productively with the European Union. Whether or not it happens remains to be seen. We are also negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union, where it seems that given the context of deglobalization of today, it might be easier, because today we are saying, in the past we used to say, let's trade and become friends. Today we are saying, let's only trade among friends. That's how the larger economic architecture of the world have changed. So European Union is also changing. European Union is also trying to respond to some of these challenges. But despite all the challenges, and and last decade has been abysmal for European Union in terms of the challenges that it has faced. Despite those challenges, European Union has survived so far. And I think that is where ultimately I come back to is this idea that what European Union represents is a different way of organizing the world, is a different way of conceptualizing the world. And so how do you think of European Union? Whether you think of European Union as a productive partner, productive player in international relations, that would mean how optimistic you are of the world. If you don't believe European Union is a particularly productive player in the world and is a productive role in the world, then there's a different element to that. Then there's a more pessimism around why nation states cannot transcend fundamental power politics in geopolitical realities. And that is why European Union is such a critical player in our understanding of international relations and continues to confound us at times and continues to make us also, continues to also surprise us at times with its ability to deliver to Europeans a certain kind of a life, which came to them after a very difficult 2 world wars. So the achievements of European Union cannot be understated. But whether it would be able to survive the ongoing flux, whether it would be able to survive the challenges that are emerging from within, that's a question that on which it would depend whether or not we will continue to look international relations as a space where there is greater sense of optimism. Because otherwise, power politics, power maximization, security maximization are something that nation states have to do for their survival. But whether as nations, whether as geographies, countries can come together and transcend those differences. That's the aspiration that European Union represents on the global firmament. And if that is something that continues to succeed, then I think our views for international relations, our views of international politics will also have to change accordingly. Thank you very much.
For picking out the key insight and for highlighting the role of the European Union in the global order. This was indeed an insightful session, and thank you for bringing out a kaleidoscopic view of the international global order, starting from how we differentiate in terms of politics, if we domestic and international, and how do we conceptualize European Union as a global order. Seeing it as a normative power, supranational power, and ending with the challenges that European Union face in the contemporary times. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. And now the floor is open for discussion. I request all the participants to please pose your questions to sir. One by one, we can take questions.
My name is I'm from studying my question is taking a hook from history, Europe was very significant before European Union came into it. Is there any future of SAARC as the next big player in the world political scenario if we talk in the context of European Union?
This was a question that often used to be asked, especially with regard to SAARC. Where is SAARC going? SAARC is a regional organization that perhaps has been one of the least effective of regional organizations. I mean, regional organizations, there are many regional organizations, but I think some of them have worked, like ASEAN, for example, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. But SAARC has been very, very poor in terms of delivery, in terms of even in terms of basic achievements. And of course, now it is defunct. Now, one of the ways in which you can think about SAARC and European Union is to look at why did European Union work? After all, as I was saying, during the Second World War, France and Germany were fighting on the opposite sides. Now, from there, for them to come to an understanding that economically it makes sense to work together through the Western European Union and the European Poland community, that's a leap of faith.
Now, that I think has not happened in the context of South Asia, where we are still burdened by the historical legacy that we carry. 75 years down the line, the legacy of partition, it still defines our identity. So, in a way, unless unless we change that ideation concept for both, I think particularly for Pakistan, I think India has moved on. India's most important challenge is China and they are in a different league. But for Pakistan, because it is so defined by India, it poses a challenge. So unless and therefore we have seen, for example, there are floods in Pakistan, and the fact that Pakistan is going to ask India for help is big news. Now, in any other part of the world, this is a country, right? You have a you have flood, you have a neighbor who can afford to help you. So why not? But this for the headlines, we have television discussions, we have op-eds being written about it. So I think the challenge is how do you make this kind of a relationship more normal? You have two neighbors who can work on certain areas. It was tried, it did not work out. I mean, the fact that Pakistan is not giving Canada most favored nation status still is mind-boggling because most favored nation status is not something that it is both India and Pakistan are part of the WTO. And if you are part of the WTO, automatically it is there. But again, the fact that Pakistan is not given it tells you a certain story about how difficult it is for Pakistan to overcome that barrier. Some policymakers in Pakistan have wanted to do that, but they have not been able to do that because of various interests in the economy. So I think that is the real issue here in terms of effectiveness of SAARC or lack of effectiveness of SAARC contingent on the historical issues that remain unresolved and how two major powers, especially in Pakistan and India, have not been taken along. And that is why you see move towards more smaller groupings like Bay of Bengal Initiative, FinStep or VDIN, where this idea is that let's work among countries that can, that are actually interested in working rather than wasting time on SAARC. So unfortunately, SAARC is not that but I think it would certainly require the debate to move that level, where you can at least look at a small functional area that you can work with. And if you start from there, maybe you can build on to something. But at the moment, it doesn't look very feasible in the short term.
So I'm Ashwin from Political Science. Second year. My question is that what is the role of European Commission, which plays with European Union rather than including other countries, but their diplomatic relationship between the countries, like civil war happens between the two countries in European Union, which are there. What are your point of view that agrees with the European Union?
See, if there are problems within the members of European Union, then I don't know of any case where there are civil wars. But certainly there are differences which have to be mediated. That mediation happens via the various agencies, and at times that mediation happens on technical issues. So that it's also interesting because the differences are very technical issues. For example, how much fish can you extract from your exclusive economic zone is a big topic of conversation. That's a big debate. Now that differential, some countries accuse other countries of fishing more from their territorial waters because it's all one. You are allowed to do that. Countries within the European Union can go to any other member states territorial waters and extract fish. So then they have differences. Someone has taken more ship, the quantity is depleting, what to do. Then they go to the European Commission for a redressal. So the redressal is not technical matters. That it's a technical issue to be decided by a group of technical experts on fishery. They will sit and they will come up with a report and you have to abide by it. So the idea there is that there is an institutional framework for the resolution of disputes, where those disputes, whether by European Commission or even at a certain stage, if the countries are not satisfied, then the jurisdiction of European Court of Justice also be the same. But those differences are resolved in that sense. They don't have any jurisdiction. If a state within the European Union has a conflict with an external actor, their European Union can't do much. The European Commission can't do much. And that has to be resolved in the countries. And how they want to do that. But within the European Union setup, if there are differences, they can be mediated by European Commission.
My question is, what role does nationalism play in the function of the European Union, as it has always been the reason for lack of cooperation? Also, there are many members of the European Union, so how it manages to solve the crisis that every nation faces?
See, nationalism has been, of course, we know that it's the fundamental organizing principle of nation states. And nationalism is something that has been driving the emergence of the present international system and has been part of the emergence of nation states throughout history. So the issue here is that whether European Union has been able to overcome a sense of national pride. And you see that in certain countries that while nationalism is not morbid, you see, for example, European football, it's very nationalistic. The supporters now, and they are equally rowdy and sometimes even Gundaish as you can have in South Asia. But I think that is largely relegated to the fields of sports, or there is a Eurovision concert that happens where every year European countries participate, send entry to for a dance and song program. But when it comes to policy making, higher level policy making, because a lot of the jurisdiction is now shifted to Brussels. So you have a group of people which are deciding many of these issues. Who have a distance from any kind of a problem from the ground. Now that is good because it allows certain quick resolution, technical resolution of these challenges like I was discussing fisheries, for example, it's very convenient. But it is also a challenge because look, Britain got out of the European Union because of nationalism. Nationalism was a big thing. Britain argued and many British politicians argued that look, we are a nationalist country, but our nationalism, our concerns are not being reflected in the way the rest of bureaucracy works. We don't want to be governed by people who sit there. So you have this disjuncture between what certain countries want. Now, thankfully, so far, Britain has not led to other countries taking the following the same because I think Britain is not being very well economically. So it's not a good example that if you move out of European Union, you will at the moment the idea is that you're actually disadvantaged. But nationalism, Spain, Catalonia. In Spain, there is a subnationalism. So nationalism is alive and well in Europe. The question is that European Union's institutions have been able so far to mediate those conflicts which rise out of nationalism. Whether they will continue to do so in the future is a big question mark, and I don't think there is any consensus on that. There are questions whether this is going to be a challenge if the perception grows that people sitting in Brussels are making these decisions with no awareness of the ground realities. Then I think it can be a bit of a problem. Many countries have expressed that intent. We have some countries like Italy, for example, Portugal and Spain. They have complained that they are not treated very well. And you have some countries which are like Hungary and Poland who remain very alive in their nationalistic aspirations, especially Eastern Europe. Because remember, they came out of this Soviet sphere. So they don't want to give up on their nationalistic sentiments. It's just that they see advantages in being part of the European Union. So whether European Union's institutions can balance those sentiments which we are very important precursor to whether they are able to continue this experiment.
Okay, so there's a question in chat from Mr. Ashish Agnoti. He says that, as you know, that some countries like Hungary have recently started imposing their national sovereignty regarding their national identity over their supranational organization. European Union, being a part of the same, particularly during the refugee crisis. So his question is that how the EU manages such voices, and does European Union have any concrete measures to cope with it?
Yes, so I think this is largely an extension of what this question about nationalism was. In Hungary, it's a good example where they have been very, very vocal about the challenge that they face. European Union is actually in a difficult position on this issue because European Union has tried to censure some of these politicians, especially on the far right. But they are also aware that if they do too much, because you have Hungary's leader who was elected despite many in the European Union not liking that person. So I think they also don't want to go down the route where they are where they are told that you are anti-democratic. People of Hungary want to elect someone. People in Brussels may not like that person. But that is, I think, once you are inside the tent, you have to accept that you will have different voices, different points of views. So I think European Union is facing a challenge on the Hungary question. And Hungary is also trying to use Russia, for example. Russia is building nuclear reactors in Hungary, and Russian Hungarian leaders have been supporting Russia, despite European Union taking a very strong position against Russia. So there are challenges there as well. And so far, European Union has tried to be very delicate in terms of responding to this challenge and not given it over emphasis. But I think Hungary and along with several other Eastern European countries are going to be a challenge for European Union's project because they believe in a certain kind of quality that is being challenged now by the reality of what is happening in Hungary.
Good afternoon. So my name is Manasi. So I just want to ask you that as we all know that
Well, that's a critique of European Union because European Union bureaucrats don't do sentimentalism. They're not known for being very sentimental about these things. So that is why there is an increasing challenge because ultimately love for your country, love for your nation, as you say, it's a very sentimental thing. People get sentimental about these things, and people get passionate about this. So sometimes being too objective, sometimes being too technical and technocratic is also a problem because then you are not being able to mobilize people for a larger national cause. And people are not going to be mobilized on European Union steps. Countries have to mobilize them individually. No one is going to come to the world, let's, European Union demands your blood and sweat, come and let's do this. I don't think anyone is going to come. It's only, so individual countries will have to do it on their own terms. And I think that's the real issue for European Union because they have been very successful as a technocratic institution. Now, as things are moving in a different direction, because you have economic distress, you have societal distress, you have countries that are moving in different directions. And very interestingly, now that you see a challenge because the Ukraine crisis is posing a lot of problems for European countries. It has been suggested that this is going to be one of the worst winters that the Europeans will face because the Russians are not going to pay the gas. All Europeans have said that they are not going to buy any gas from Russia. So they are turning the taps off. And how will the Europeans survive their winters? And that's a big question. Inflation is very high. Fuel costs are very high. So how do you manage this economic distress? when for a generation of Europeans, they have not seen this kind of history. See, we are used to it. The South is used to it. Western countries, Western European countries are not used to this kind of history. So whether this would revive old style nationalism, where you have competing nationalisms or countries who say we don't want to be part of this European decision, I think that's going to be very vital facet of the next several months conversations.
Sir, my question to you is related to the presence of ICJ, International Court of Justice. So, in consideration of the contemporary scenario of growing politics, growing global politics, I just want to ask, what role can ICJ play in maintaining peace in this global politics? As we can see by limited knowledge, I can say that there is sluggish vote arbitration growing all over. So what would you say ICJ can play a role in this maintaining peace in this global order or contemporary society? Like,
I don't think there is much of a role, frankly, because the big crises are coming from big powers. If small countries are fighting somewhere, you can imagine Nauru and Papua New Guinea fighting with each other. And they go to ICJ. I think ICJ will give a verdict. They'll have to follow. But if you have China on one side and Taiwan back with America on the other, it's very difficult. And this is a question for Taiwan. This is a life and death question. It's a central question. For China, this is a question of national rejuvenation. Why would they abide by ICJ as well? And ICJ can only deliver what if both sides go to the ICJ and say, give us a vote. So there is a problem there as well. Both sides have to first agree that they want to go to ICJ. And then you go to the ICJ, even then you have a choice of not to abide by ICJ as Chinese. So I don't think that international law as such as its power where you can make binding decisions. And that's a challenge. International law works where there is a consensus among countries on certain normative standards. International law is not like a domestic law. Here you have police and judiciary that will ensure that you follow the ruling. You don't have any United Nations doesn't have an army. And you don't have authorities which can actually pull you and say, why aren't you following this? I mean, they can pass some resolution and implement and who cares about this? Big powers especially. So I think there is a challenge there in terms of how do you implement ICJ's verdicts. And international law in particular has not been seen to be very effective. Where international law has been effective is largely in different circumstances. One is you take an example of European Court of Justice, where regionally countries agree on certain norms and certain principles. So they come up with a code of conduct. And therefore, if a country does not abide by those codes of conduct, European Court of Justice passes a verdict, you have to follow. The other is in trade. So World Trade Organization has a dispute settlement mechanism where you have the international trade law, which is much more effective because countries know that economic costs are important. So if for example, there be massive disputes on trade, of market access, of tariffs, where countries have gone to the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, and verdicts have come out in favor of one against the other, and they have followed those verdicts. Those verdicts have been followed by the concerned countries, and so there they have been effective. But apart from these two, we don't find very many cases where international law has been an effective mechanism of dispute resolution, because the implementation part is just they don't have institutional structures for implementation.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Vilas Thakur, and my question is regarding that. What is the future of multilateral platforms at international level, as we are foreseeing economic depression and there is a war in Europe, and at the international politics and relations, the relations are more fragile on the basis that on the national interest. So, how we see the future of the multilateral organizations and the future of the
multilateralism actually it seems that it's most vulnerable at the moment, because most of the multilateral institutions are facing a big crisis of credibility. See, when COVID started, before COVID, we used to think that institutions like World Health Organization, they are technical institutions where countries want to work together on health. Why would countries want to fight over health issues? Health is a concern for all nations, for all individuals. You want best possible health outcomes. You want the best possible medicines. You want best possible reports on what is going on in the world. Because it's in your interest, in my interest, to have best possible results, best possible health. But it turned out that even WHO has become very political. They decided not to release information. They were under pressure from China. They released it in fits and starts, and when they released it was not very effective. Then they changed their assessment time and time again, which meant that the COVID-19 crisis was much worse than it could, it would have been much better handled. So now, if an organization like WHO is facing such problems, you can imagine more political organizations, which are also political in nature. So UN Security Council today is very ineffective because Chinese and the Russians are fighting with the West on every single issue in the UN Security. India has made it very clear that unless India is represented in the UN Security Council's credibility is at an all-time low. So multilateralism actually is facing a lot of problems. And therefore, what we are now witnessing is the rise of what are called mini-laterals. Quad is one, quadrilateral security dialogue, India, US, Japan, and Australia. There are other such minilaterals, trilaterals, which are emerging in the Indo-Pacific, in other areas, where the idea is that instead of waiting for an institution to emerge, let's have like-minded countries that work together on certain issues. Let's get together and get some work done, rather than have a broader organization and multilateral organization. So I think we are at an inflection point in terms of the evolution of multilateral institutions. And European Union, in particular, as we have been discussing, is facing a lot of challenges. But so far, it has succeeded. Because I think countries of the European Union, apart from Britain, still see some advantage in having it.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your critical insights with us on how we conceptualize EU in the global world order. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you for being here, coming here all the way and being with us here today. And we are really overwhelmed by your benign presence. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll be starting with the second session in the next 5 minutes. So you all request please be here and maintain silence.